Meanwhile, he has called almost every presidential election since 1984. Alan Lichtman is a distinguished professor of history at American University. He predicted early on, in fact, that Donald Trump would win the presidency in this past election cycle, even when other analysts said otherwise. But he has now said he also believes that Mr. Trump will be impeached during his first term, though he does make clear that is but a gut reaction. Professor Lichtman, good enough to join us once again from Washington. So first of all, Professor, I said after the election, I'd love to have you come on and explain how it was that you were right. So the floor is yours. How was it that you were right?
I was right because I did not consider the polls. I ignored the pundits. I did not look at the day-to-day events of the campaign. In other words, I had my own unique way of looking at elections, the keys to the White House, which is based on the study of every American presidential election from 1860 to 1980. I developed it in 1981 and have since used it, as you indicated, for successful prediction for more than 30 years. And the keys are really simple. There are 13 true or false questions designed to probe the performance and strength of the party holding the White House. And they look at the big picture, things like third parties, midterm elections, scandal, social unrest, the long and short-term economy, policy change, foreign policy successes and failures. And the keys made evident the vulnerability of the incumbent Democrats, who lost big time in the midterms of 2014, didn't have a sitting president running, had a contentious primary battle, had to deal with a third party that looked pretty strong through most of the campaign, didn't have a major policy accomplishment in the second term, didn't have a big splashy foreign policy success in the second term, like the dispatch of bin Laden in the first term. And so my system indicated that Donald Trump won the election, not because of the Donald Trump campaign, but despite the Donald Trump campaign, which was really outside very much the parameters of history.
Hillary Clinton has said, as have senior campaign staffers, that they truly believe that it was the two letters sent by FBI Director James Comey that would ultimately cost her the election. How to allow for those?
I can understand why they might believe that. But let me make two things clear. One, I first made my prediction in late September, and then I doubled down on that prediction before the Comey letter. So my prediction had nothing to do with the Comey letter or any other event of the campaign. It had to do with how elections really work in terms of the big picture of history, and that is assessments of the strength and performance of the party holding the White House. I exonerate Hillary Clinton for this loss. She wasn't responsible. It was the vulnerabilities of the incumbent party that portended a change election.
Is polling dead?
I would hope polling is dead, although not the pollsters. Pollsters are good people. They're friends of mine. I propose during the next campaign we send all the pollsters to a very nice Pacific island for a very long vacation. Here are the problems with polls. First of all, polls are not predictors. They are abused and misused as predictors. Polls are snapshots, and you never know how that snapshot is going to change in the future. In addition, polls screen for likely voters, but they really don't know who the actual voters are going to be. So when the poll says, you know, we have an error margin of 3.5% plus and minus, that is just sampling error. That does not take into account all the other kinds of errors, such as an inadequate likely voter screen that could creep in. And by the way, those who use the polls, the so-called analysts, like Nate Silver, they're no better than the underlying polls. So when Nate Silver says there's a 71.4% probability of Hillary Clinton winning, that's meaningless because that's no better than the underlying polls. Nate Silver does not do independent analysis. Nate Silver is a clerk. He just compiles polls. And that's why he was so famously wrong this year.
And so you used your equation again successfully, as it turned out in this election cycle. But for fear of burying the lead, perhaps, I also mentioned you believe that Donald Trump will be impeached. You said it's a gut feeling. Why do you have it?
Yeah, it's not scientific, obviously. Two things. One of my Lichtman rules of politics is what you see is what you get. Candidates don't change. It's like when you marry someone, oh my God, I'm going to change them. Never works. And Donald Trump, throughout his career, has played fast and loose with the law, and that could translate into his presidency. Just to cite a few examples, we know he ran an unregistered illegal charity in the state of New York. He's had to stop fundraising. We know he used that charity to make an illegal campaign contribution. There is strong evidence that he used his charity to settle personal business debts. There's strong evidence that he broke the Cuban embargo at a time when that was a serious federal crime. He faces a civil racketeering suit for Trump University. A dozen women have accused him of sexual assault. Any one or more of those women could civilly sue him. And let's not forget, it was the Paula Jones civil suit on sexual harassment that opened the door to the impeachment of Bill Clinton. Secondly, why might a Republican Congress impeach him? Well, it would have to be something fairly egregious, but let's not forget, Donald Trump is a wild card. He's unpredictable. You don't know what he might do. Republicans love control, and they would vastly prefer to see as president Mike Pence, a predictable, down-the-pipe, Christian conservative Republican.
And yet, Professor, you just ran a rather long laundry list of what would seem, if nothing else, a list of potential disqualification for a candidate or even for a president-elect. You just mentioned, though, a Republican Congress would have to find something particularly egregious. Were the things that you mentioned not particularly egregious?
Well, they were before the presidency. I don't think a Republican Congress is going to impeach him on something that happened before the presidency.
No, but I guess my question is, did that list, if nothing else, and again, I know you ignore pundits and pollsters, but do the things on that list not make it into the Lichtman analysis here?
No, they don't.
They don't.
Except for one key, and I have a key which says it counts against the party holding the White House if the challenging party candidate is one of those once-in-a-generation inspirational candidates like Franklin Roosevelt on the Democratic side or Ronald Reagan on the Republican side. And Donald Trump has a certain degree of charisma, but I didn't give him that key precisely because he has this incredible record of playing fast and loose with the law, fast and loose with the truth, which led a majority of the American voters to believe he wasn't qualified to be president. So he didn't turn the challenger charisma key against the incumbent Democrats, but that wasn't necessary. They had enough other problems. That's why I said Trump won this election despite who Donald Trump is and despite the kind of campaign that he ran, which offended, a huge segment of the American voting population.
In the end, your math works out for you, to be sure. Professor Alan Lichtman, and if that impeachment of which you just discussed does come to pass, I'm inviting you back once again. We can discuss it. We can discuss it all. Professor, as always, we appreciate seeing you again. Thanks for the time.
My great pleasure.